Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from wherever you are, and thank you so much for joining us today. This segment of our nitty-gritty business winning best practices series is titled Blueprint to Winning. We'll be discussing industry-accepted fundamentals of a framework to help win more business in any industry. Thank you again for registering and submitting your questions in advance of the webinar. Many of those questions will be answered during. You may submit any additional questions as we go through the webinar through your control panel in the Questions tab. Time permitting, we'll get to those during or at the end. Webinar slides and the video replay will be on our website by tomorrow, so you can watch for those and share them with your team. A reminder for APMP members, this webinar can be applied toward your continuing education units required for APMP certification. I am Mallory Price, Training and Marketing Coordinator here at Shipley. And joining me are Amy McGeady. She's joining us from Texas. She is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Services here at Shipley. Amy has held many leadership positions focused on winning business. Before joining Shipley, she owned and managed her own business development consulting business and led a successful nonprofit organization for many years. Amy is certified at the professional level of APMP and is an APMP fellow. Vicki Griesinger is executive business winning consultant here at Shipley, and she has over 30 years of experience in applying and implementing business development processes, change management, and business transformation initiatives. Besides her current work with Shipley, she has worked for Boeing, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Korn Ferry, and Microsoft, to name a few. Vicki is also an APMP fellow. Brad Douglas is also joining us. He is Executive Vice President of Shipley's Global Services and also an APMP fellow. Brad will moderate today's webinar and provide insights we've gained from proposal practitioners from across industries and markets. So before we get to our agenda, we wanted to tell you a little bit about Shipley. We are a global professional services firm. We have business development training and certification. We offer services for proposal management, writing, and content management services. We help in consulting for end-to-end proposals, capture, sales, and pursuit management, business winning process improvement, and we offer professional and career development, such as this webinar. So take a look at those. And to get to our agenda today, so here's what we will address. What is a blueprint to winning? What are common drivers and barriers for that blueprint? Benefits of developing a blueprint to winning? Where do you start? And examples. And then at the end, we will get to a question and answer. So Brad, I think I have talked enough and I will pass this on to you.
Okay, Mallory, please. Thank you. And thanks everyone for taking time out of your day today for this this webinar. And Vicki and Amy, thank you. And Mallory, please feel free to interrupt and interject questions as they come in, and we'll try our best to address those in a timely way. So Blueprint to Winning, interesting name for a topic. I think we've all heard the term blueprint thrown around throughout our careers and in our everyday life. And so maybe we haven't thought of a blueprint in the context of competing for business and trying to win work and win more work. So you can see here common types of blueprints that we're more familiar with, you know, that we hear about: architectural and structural, mechanical, sports. You know, every sports team, every game has a playbook. You know, I think it's a blueprint. It's a blueprint on how they plan to compete, how they are plan to adjust and flex based on who they're playing. You got 3D digital models, of course, city layouts and towns and villages. They've got their blueprints. There's, of course, in technology and innovation, there's all kinds of blueprints preparing for the advanced technology and the development. And then, of course, business process. And we're so happy to have Vicki with us on this webinar today, because this is really Vicki's area of expertise. She's certified in change management and business process improvement. And so she's got some really good insights. And then Amy as well in actually helping organizations and clients apply a blueprint that helps them operate more efficiently, compete more effectively, and win more business. So again, kind of similar then, what we just talked about is what is this blueprint to winning? These are a few key components. It's got to be structured and focused. It's focusing, of course, a blueprint to winning on revenue generation, and hopefully profitable revenue. It does require leadership support. It has to be collaborative. We have to assess where we're at and where we want to go. And Vicki and Amy are going to talk more about that. It's got to be agile. It's got to be flexible and adaptable to our environment. We encourage everyone, if you're trying to figure out what's your blueprint in your organization, it's got to be well documented. Within the blueprint, there has to be workflows and frameworks. There has to be decision points where we can collaborate, get together, and make decisions. We're going to talk about that. Has to be actively managed. It can't be documented and then sit on a shelf somewhere, or on a hard drive or a SharePoint site. And then it has to be kept current and fluid as our markets change and our organization changes and we bring in new people, new processes. So those are a few baseline points to a blueprint to winning. That's what we mean for today as we talk through this webinar. So going back to some of the more common blueprints, you got most common probably is a construction blueprint. We're going to build a new home, an office building, a structure of some sort. And on the right side here of the screen, you see a business development blueprint. Well, they both have to be scalable, and to scale, they both have to provide certain views. We're not always competing in business for the same type of work. So we've got to be adaptable, and leadership and staff have to be on board. Flexible dimension, size, and scope. A framework is going to have some symbols and icons to identify maybe key milestones or key deliverables in the process. We've got to have annotations. There's got to be enough detail in a blueprint to really be effective and help us and guide us. And so you see the similarities in what we commonly think of as a blueprint to building or innovating or new technology or a sports playbook, to hopefully what you're most interested today in this webinar, and that is business development. A lot of similarities, and that's what we mean by the blueprint. Now, there are certain drivers. If we're going to establish a blueprint for winning in our organization, there's certain drivers that usually drive us to do that. And Vicki, if you'd be so kind as to talk through what you've seen as the main drivers that you see that drive organizations to really sit down and try and figure this out and map out their blueprint to winning.
Yeah, there are common drivers for performance improvement that we see. These include effects from the external business environment, like new regulations, new or stronger competition, changes in the economy, might be mergers and acquisitions, both pre and post. Other drivers are internally focused, such as changes in executive leadership, might be metrics. Has an organization lost a series of opportunities in new or existing markets? And simply, another driver is simply seeing the development of capture plans and proposals as hectic, as ad hoc, or as dependent on staff heroics. A number of drivers for developing such blueprints. And yeah, these four are key.
Yeah. And I know, Vicki, you've seen and we've seen sometimes, sadly, sometimes it takes over there on the right side a string of losses. We've lost major competes, or maybe we lost a contract that we've been incumbent on, and all of a sudden now we hit the panic button and say, you know what, are we really doing things how we should be doing?
Exactly right.
Good. So thank you. And then Vicki, would you walk through some of the potential benefits of actually stepping back, taking time, and establishing this blueprint?
Sure. There are obviously many benefits to the organization, starting with understanding the effects of the external environment on the organization, to the alignment of high-level strategic plans and objectives, all the way down to the process of winning new business. So imagine producing results in a much more orderly fashion. The documented blueprint typically results in an increased win rate and capture ratio. It also clarifies performance goals and expectations, reduces cost and risk, and increases collaboration among employees. We also see smoother transitions from sales to delivery. Really key area, that transition. And keep in mind that the top business development talent wants to work in a company that gets it. Be a go-to company. These are just a handful of the benefits that we see.
Yeah, so Vicki, if you don't mind, I'll ask you a little bit on that that last point you made about attracting and retaining talent. We all are seeing this fierce fight for the best of the best talent, and people now have choices. And so what you're saying, if I heard you right, was it helps in recruiting the best talent. Is that what you were referring to, right?
Yes, organizations that have the discipline processes, that understand how to do business development, are more attractive to the top business development talent. And as those of us in this business know, recruiters are calling on various levels. And the top talent really wants to go to that company or that organization that understands how to do business development correctly.
Excellent point. Yeah, who wants to go to work in a chaotic environment that's completely ad hoc with very little structure? I mean, a few of us might, but you know, the best talent probably wants to go contribute to a place where they can be efficient and they can improve. Great, thank you. And then the opposite of this, would you share with us, Vicki, what you've seen as common barriers as to why organizations resist and push back on creating this blueprint or this framework for doing business?
Sure. Many organizations develop a blueprint and then have their organization reassessed 1 to 2 years later. But a lot of organizations avoid establishing and implementing a blueprint for several reasons, 4 of which are shown here. The complexity of their organization can be overwhelming. Perhaps leadership is not supportive, or past changes didn't stick. They reverted back to their old ways. Other barriers may be that it's perceived as too hard. Others may not want best practices. They may want something less.
Yeah. And Vicki, given your experience with several organizations and employers, is there one, if I forced you to say, this is the most common reason why organizations resist, would you pinpoint one of these or another?
I'd say organizations can't afford not to do this. A blueprint and implementation provides so many benefits and quickly pays for itself. So organizations are worried about the cost of this or the effort, but truly organizations can't afford not to do this. And always start with the end in mind, not with the problems, opportunities, or methods, but with the goals. What result must the organization achieve? Is it to reduce costs, raise revenue, or reduce cycle time? And what should be different when we finish doing what's needed? What does that future state need to look like?
Oh, that's such a great point, because sometimes we we take on an initiative like this and we just think, let's just get it documented. That's not a good enough reason. Like you said, what is the outcome, the business outcome? Okay, thank you, excellent. So reasons why we should establish some kind of process, method, blueprint, framework, reasons why sometimes we hold back and don't do it. And this just reinforces exactly what Vicki just said. What are those desired outcomes? What are the clear objectives? If we're going to push the pause button a little bit or accelerate momentum a little bit and say, we've got to get this down. We've got to not reinvent the wheel every single time. So clear objectives, clear outcomes. Within any kind of blueprint, there's frameworks, there's workflows. Those all have to be well spelled out and thought out and articulated. And we're going to go through, Amy's going to walk us through a notional blueprint, and we're going to talk a little bit about where do you start, organizationally, whether you already have a process or a framework, maybe you want to tweak it, maybe you want to improve it, maybe you need to scale it. Or if you're kind of starting from ground zero and you need to start establishing, where do we start? So we'll talk about that in just a few minutes here. And always part of a good blueprint, I'm going to make the sports analogy again here, because I'm kind of a sports junkie, and I've coached a lot of little league sports. Everyone needs to know their role. What is your responsibility? What is your role given this particular team we're playing, or this offense or defense we're going against? So what core competencies and skills do we need? Have we properly evaluated our personnel? Do they have the skill sets, strengths and gaps in our people? Vicki talked about hiring, training, retaining. The more well-defined, well-oiled machine we have, the better chance we have of winning. And then are we offering enough professional development for our people that actually execute the blueprint? It's one thing to have a blueprint, have it well documented, do some initial training on it, but are we professionally developing our people beyond that?
Hey, Brad.
Yes, please.
Sorry, you can finish your thought. I just have a question that came in.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Mallory.
Okay, so I think I will pose this question to Vicki, and Brad and Amy, if you want to chime in as well. We've talked a lot about leadership and things like that. So this question says, do you have any tips on convincing leadership that we are under-resourced and reinventing the wheel on every deal?
Okay. Convincing leadership that we just flat out don't have, it sounds like the question is we just don't have the resources, the bandwidth, or the technology we need. Amy, I'll give you a first shot at that. Any tips on convincing leadership to move this forward?
Sure. Well, I think anytime you're trying to convince your leadership to make any changes, it's really important to put yourself in their shoes and think about what is they need. As Vicki mentioned, like, what are the company's goals? Because usually your leadership, that's what they're held accountable for. So I think if you're trying to convince your leadership that you don't have enough resources and you're reinventing the wheel every time, probably a good starting point is to think through, well, what's the result of all of that? For example, are you losing key staff that you can't retain great people and they're going to your competitors because you're just burning them out? Are you losing bids that you should be winning? Are the costs of submitting your bids high because you're, just racing to the finish line and having to do things that are more expensive than if you were well prepared and doing things in a systematic way? So I think for me, whenever I'm trying to talk to decision makers, I think it's important to try to think about what are the things that appeal to them, what are their concerns, and then frame your points in terms of the things that matter to them and to the company.
Excellent. Vicki, did you want to add anything?
No, I would agree with Amy. That's spot on.
Good. Good question. Anything else at this point, Mallory?
Not at this point.
Okay. All right. Amy, I'm going to ask you then to walk through just the very basics, the fundamentals of a blueprint and where we can kind of get started in at least framing this out, some of the key aspects of it, and then we'll go from there. Would you walk us through this, please?
Well, when designing and developing a blueprint for winning, a really good place to start is just with a very simple framework like this. This will probably look familiar to a lot of people who are participating in our webinar today. And as you can see, this just contains the the basic phases of our process. It shows how they build on each other, and it starts to identify the key places where decisions have to be made that act as transition points from one phase to the next. So if we start with this high level, just a very high level view of, okay, what does it take end to end from the time we start thinking about winning business until the time we actually have a contract that we're executing? What are those phases? What are the places where we start transitioning between the phases? I think that's a really good place to start and can make all of this feel like something you can accomplish.
And then as we see, there's these blue diamonds here with gates and key milestones in the framework. Would you walk us through, Amy, just some of the key milestones that ought to be included as we think through maybe establishing a blueprint?
Sure. So, here we'll talk about, we're really going to dive a little bit into the decision gates. Another type of milestones are our reviews. In terms of decision gates, when we're talking about those, we are really talking about those strategic decisions when we're deciding, do we continue to go forward and allocate resources, or is it time to withdraw resources? So usually decision gates, they're led by leadership. They're addressing, key business and strategic issues. And there's only a limited set of ways that those decision gates can end. You either advance, you end, you defer because you don't have enough information to make a decision, and then you determine what your next steps are. We're not going into the reviews in detail, but those are often more kind of the tactical pieces of just making sure the quality of what we're doing at that phase in our process is, the quality up to our standards, and that we've refined anything that we need to.
Great. And so in the context of most of us on the webinar, I'm sure, are involved in one way or another in business development and trying to identify, qualify, or win or execute work within our organizations. And often we hear the term sales pipeline. We've got this pipeline of opportunities, and we need to funnel that pipeline down. And so, Amy, what you're saying here on these decision gates, this next slide, would you walk us through this notion of how in a business winning business development blueprint, part of the goal is to narrow down our focus into winnable opportunities, right?
Yeah, and then I like it that you've mentioned a pipeline and a funnel. Pipeline, you have a lot of opportunities and you're trying to get more and more refined. So, as we have here, we have a lot of opportunities going into our funnel. We have to decide which of those opportunities are we really interested in pursuing. And then, as we go through, if we figure out, are we interested? Yes, we advance. No, we're not interested. We go ahead and we stop pursuing that opportunity. If we've decided to advance, then we start gathering some more information about the customer, how well of a fit we are, how well of a fit they are for our strategic objectives. So we have to then make a pursuit decision, and we decide, are we going to go on to dedicating more resources for capture? Then, once we know that the customer is actually going to be seeking bids, we have to make a preliminary bid decision. Is this a good fit for us? Are we positioned to win? If we think that we are, Then we make a decision to go ahead and continue to move forward in terms of planning our proposal, figuring out what our winning price will be. As you know, as we are potentially looking at a draft RFP and know a little bit more about requirements, we make a decision. Okay, are we really going to bid on this opportunity? If yes, we'll need to prepare a proposal. So we advance onto that part of our funnel. So we see like our decisions are getting more and more refined to the point where we decide, okay, we are positioned, we are bidding, we have a strong proposal, we are turning in that proposal. And so that's how our funnel is getting more and more refined from our broad pipeline down to winnable opportunities that we're competing for.
So, and comparing this back to where we started, these different types of blueprints, you know, maybe, you know, we're looking at a building, and this is no different. The business development, these decision gates are almost, let's say, inspections. You know, you can't start framing a home until you've got the foundation exactly right and aligned and measurements are in place and you're ready to go. You can't start then putting the truss on and the roof, and you can't work on the drywall until everything else is in order. So business development is not that different. We've got to have these key inspection gates, decision gates in place as part of our framework, built into it, so that we can do what Amy said. And that is, you know, there's only a few decisions that come out of this, right, Amy? I mean,
that's right. You know, at any decision, if we're advancing, that means we're going ahead. So, you know, in business, that means we're make sure there's funds committed, there are people involved, we're ready to track our results. If we're deferring, it usually means we need more information. So we potentially need to do a competitive assessment, or we need to keep gathering more information about the customer. If we defer, then we need to figure out, so, you know, what are those contingencies? What are those things that we're waiting on that we can't make a decision yet because of? And then set a schedule to reconvene and think about that decision again. And then, you know, at the end, it usually means we've identified some type of showstopper, something that's a really valid reason not to continue. The risk might be too high, or we realize we really can't meet certain requirements, or someone else is positioned to win and they're really unbeatable. But regardless of whether we're advancing, deferring, or ending at this phase, it's really important to go ahead and document that information. We learn from it, we can archive our decisions, and that helps us be able to predict in the future. Even going back to that question that we had about, you know, how do we talk to our leadership? I think whenever we're learning from our experiences, we're paying attention to, you know, when do they go forward and advance on decisions? When are they ending? I think that can just help us be able to support our leadership better and have them be in a position to support us.
Thank you. This is really such a key part of a blueprint, because those of us that have been in business development for a while, we know how hard it is to end an opportunity if we've already invested quite a bit of time and resource. And it takes real courage and leadership when things aren't right, and our probability of win is down to below 10%. We have to make these hard, critical decisions, and we have to build this into our blueprint. Now, we talked about early on when we first talked about the topic, that within a master blueprint, whether it's a building, a new technology system, whatever it is, business development in this case, there's these workflows that we have to eventually build out. Amy walked us through a very basic framework with, I think there were 6, type of main process areas. Well, within that, we've got to eventually build out a workflow as we advance opportunities through our funnel and through our pipeline. And so we're not going to dwell on this because this is a whole topic in and of itself, but many of you are familiar with the term capture planning, capture management. Well, here's an industry accepted workflow that fits within the blueprint of winning. And so if we're trying to compete and win, early capture activity, this is way pre-proposal, involves mainly, you see down the left side, these 5 categories of key workflows, key activities within our blueprint. And to the extent that we ignore any of this, we run the risk of being inefficient and ineffective. So we won't dwell on this, but here's a simple workflow within a blueprint. And this one focuses on capture. Now here you're going to see a workflow that focuses, once we get to where if we've got to compete through a proposal and our customer is demanding a proposal, requiring a proposal, here's a sample notional workflow within our blueprint to winning. How do we go about preparing for and writing and executing a proposal with all of the built-in milestones and reviews that Amy talked about? So here's, again, a notional workflow within a blueprint for winning. And so as you think about this in your organization and how you want to apply this, remember what we talked about early on: scalable and flexible. What you're seeing here doesn't work for everybody. Might work for hardly anybody. We've got to tailor it and make it our own. But the learning point we're hoping here in this webinar is establish a master blueprint, establish phases or decision gates, key milestones within that blueprint, and then build some workflows and that help you get to what Vicki said, those objectives. What are you trying to achieve? The end result. Okay, so a few examples of workflows within a blueprint for winning. So we promised we would talk about, based on many of the questions that you all submitted when you registered, some of those questions, in fact, maybe I ought to pause here, but there were several questions about, not only what is a blueprint for winning, there were a lot of questions about that, but where do we start? And Amy talked about one place to start, that is building out a basic set of key process areas, if you will. The other key point of where to start is we need to focus in on a few key areas. One is, and Vicki, we've all talked about this, we've got to get a commitment to start developing this blueprint. We've got to then spend time discovering where we're at. What is our current state of business development? Are we in a complete ad hoc mode, or are we a little better than that? Are we world class? Where are we? Then we've got to define. This gets to Vicki's point. What are our objectives, our desired outcomes? We've got to define these milestones we've talked about, document everything, including the frameworks and the workflows, and then how are we going to execute this, educate our team, and to Vicki's expertise, continuously improve, business improvement. So we've got to start with at least those things. And Vicki, would you walk us through, there's generally accepted 4 levels of performance improvement in any business. Would you just quickly walk us through what these 4 levels are that we need to pay attention to?
Absolutely. And we have first the worker level, the skills, motivations, and actions of individuals, the work level, the workplace level, and the world level, which is the external environment. And organizations often try to improve performance at just the worker level. And they assume that if employees did everything right, results would improve. But really, because there are 4 levels of performance, any one of these can drive or impede results. So we have to keep all 4 in mind.
Good. And for those of you that want to explore this a little more, I mean, we're going to post this on the website, so feel free to come back, and you see the source here. It's from the International Society for Performance Improvement, of which Vicki is a certified member. And so, you know, we have taken into consideration various levels. And then on the previous slide, I had mentioned we've got to know our as is, our current state of our framework. Where are we currently at? There is actually a model for this, and again, it can be modified and tweaked. This is a concept based on capability maturity models that many of you are familiar with, especially in software engineering and some other areas. But Vicki, would you walk us through this assessment model, if you will, on how we can maybe take a look at our current state as it relates to a business development framework and a blueprint?
Yeah, thank you. And Brad mentioned the importance of discovering where your organization is, the current state. And in any business process improvement activity, like creating a blueprint, you have to know where you're starting from. You need to analyze your current state, determine your gaps, and make recommendations for a future state. And one approach to doing this is to identify the key capabilities categories needed to compete and win, and then assess your maturity within these categories. So let's build out this slide fully. This framework shows the established best practices in business development. Many companies, BD organizations, have been assessed against this proven framework. And if you look at the capability categories across the top, you'll see that they are organized by customer, leadership, people, process management, and support. And we group our findings and recommendations by these capability categories. And on the left side, you'll see maturity levels, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The least mature organizations are at level 1, and that is where you find ad hoc processes, perhaps driven by individual heroics. And as you move up the scale, you'll have more discipline, more documentation, more best practices. And in our world, level 3 is that defined level and is the goal state of many of our clients. Level 3 organizations do all of these activities across the board that focus on developing competencies. And there's a standard tailorable approach to business winning. You know, Brad mentioned the house analogy a few minutes ago, and I like to use that same analogy. If an organization has the best practices at level 1 and 2, they are in place. And if you have practices that you build upon at level 3, think about it this way. If you don't have, say, level 2 practices in place strongly enough, there's a tendency for that foundation or that house to sag or collapse, and that reveals holes or gaps in your processes. So, you know, really important to have everything at level 2 in place before you advance up to 3.
Thank you, Vicki. And just, you know, there's a method to the madness, and this model, though it you know, at a glance it looks kind of complicated and overwhelming, but it's really not. You know, you start diving down into each one of those cells. So, for example, you go down to the leadership, you go down to you know, the level 2. We've got to have a sales, a capture management process workflow in place. People need to know their roles, their responsibilities, and we need to have some kind of methodology and approach to that. So thank you. And this is, again, Vicki said it, this is industry accepted approach to really figuring out where we're at. And this is a small part of Shipley's business, but it's a very strategic part of Shipley's business when a client will ask us to come in and really do a deep dive in these areas to help them either improve what they have or at least get started. So this goes back to similar to what Amy talked about, that baseline blueprint, if you will. You know, there's often, whether we know it or not, whether we've documented it or not, when we're competing for business in a business winning, business development space, we're working through a flow. And some of this may be completely intuitive to those of us that have been around a while, and we say, yeah, of course, we need to segment our market. But this is a basic framework, and it will look familiar, as Amy said, to many of you, because Shipley took a stand years ago and said, you know what? Industry needs a baseline blueprint for winning. And so we're gonna pulse industry. We're gonna talk to organizations and companies in various industries, various shapes, various sizes, globally, and we're going to put a stake in the ground and say, here is a baseline blueprint for winning. And you need to make this your own. You need to tailor it and adapt it and flex it. And Amy's going to just briefly walk us through. We want to be respectful of your time. She's going to walk us through each phase of this baseline blueprint. Amy?
So, you know, at the very beginning of this process is market segmentation. You know, we can't sell our products or our services to just anyone. We need to identify and explore our strategic market areas, and then really think about our potential customers and start breaking them into smaller groups or segments so that we can group together customers that have similar types of needs, similar interests, characteristics, and then come up with an approach to marketing to each of those segments that really is a good fit for them. And then, you know, we decided we're going to pursue and come up with a campaign. When we move on to long-term positioning, we really have made a decision to enter a market. We want to establish ourselves in that market and be in a position to influence perceptions of us. So we want to control our own brand, our reputation. We want to be known as being able to meet the needs of this market, and we want to start prospecting for leads. Back to Brad, your point earlier about creating a pipeline of potential leads, and then start determining, do we have opportunities of interest in that pipeline? And you know, the opportunities that look interesting, and they look interesting enough to justify additional research, additional contacts with a customer, to go ahead and make a decision. We're interested and to continue going on. When we move on to phase 2, our opportunity assessment and qualification, we've already decided we want to know more. We're building on the knowledge that we gained earlier. So we're doing research on the opportunity, on the specific customer, on the competition who also might be pursuing that same customer. We're confirming alignment at this point in time. Do we have the capabilities that meet this customer's needs? Is there a good fit there? And then do we have, you know, aligned strategic direction? Once we figure out, yes, we are a good fit, we have the core competencies that the customer needs and wants, and we can provide them, and we have the ability to influence this customer and have them choose us, then we go ahead and make a pursuit decision to continuing on to pursue this opportunity. At this phase, we start doing what we call capture or opportunity planning. So we've made a decision to pursue. Now it's time to come up with that plan. How are we going to influence this customer? Who do we need to get involved? What is our game plan from moving from someone that the customer doesn't really know to someone the customer does know, and then to that great position of being the preferred vendor so that the customer not only knows us, but they want to choose us. So usually the the decision gate at this phase is because the customer has decided they're going to start seeking bids. So at that time, our company will make the decision, we will make a bid or no bid decision that we want to go forward in trying to pursue what's going to be usually a competitive procurement. We start planning our proposal. So we start thinking through, how is our team going to write a winning response? How are we going to transition our win strategy that we developed earlier in this process into messages and other things that will actually go into our proposal? Typically at this phase, we'll either see a draft RFP or a final RFP. Once we have that, we can assess, once we know the requirements, is this opportunity still worth pursuing? Did we uncover any showstoppers along the way? So we're validating that decision to bid. And Brad, as you mentioned earlier, if we get to this point, this can be a really hard point to turn back and no bid. But if we determined in looking at the requirements, there's something we just can't do, that might be the decision we make. But if we decide, nope, we've seen the RFP, we want to keep going, we start working on developing our proposal that responds to a request, we make assignments, we plan our content, we start drafting, we do a series of reviews. Either it's the deadline and at the same time we believe that the quality of our proposal is good enough, we make a decision to submit. So that's that gate of proposal submittal. And then finally, once we have submitted our proposal, there can be, the customer might come back to us with questions. They come to us because they're ready to start to negotiate. Sometimes there will be parts of our proposal that we have to revise as part of maybe an orals presentation. And then, assuming we've done all the right things and the customer chooses us, our leadership has to make a final decision of, are they going to accept the final offer that the client made to us?
Amy, if I could just interject, I saw several questions that came in asking about our flexibility. In fact, one was submitted here during the webinar on this is how do we make this blueprint or framework flexible? I just want to point out, you'll notice on each of these phases that Amy has talked about, this feedback loop. This is critical. This isn't a lockstep A to Z blueprint and workflow we're dealing with in business development. It's just not. There is constant feedback loops by key stakeholders, opportunity owners, the practitioners that are actually doing the work. So I just wanted to point out that this feedback mechanism not get lost in all of these activities that you've described.
That's a really good point. And here you can see we've got the feedback loops along the bottom. Shipley has worked with hundreds of clients over the last 50 years, maybe thousands, I don't know. But, we developed this blueprint for winning, but it really needs to be flexible, adaptable, and scalable. So our intention here is not to say, hey, this is the only way to win business, but to say with a strong blueprint that fits your company, and if you've thought through what are the decision points, what are the tasks that you do at each phase, if you've thought that all through, and as Vicki mentioned, you have discipline in following that, we just know that increases your success and your odds of winning. It doesn't have to be this blueprint. It could be some variation of this blueprint.
Excellent, thanks. Thank you, Amy. Let me pause here. Mallory, is there any question that maybe we haven't addressed yet that has come in?
Yeah, so you did address that one on an agile work environment, which I wanted to make sure we got to. We did have another one. How do we get teaming partners on board with our approach to doing proposals?
Oh, proposal-specific question. And I'm going to take the liberty to expand the question a little bit, not just the proposal, but how do we get them on board for the opportunity as a whole? Great question. Thank you for submitting that. Amy, thoughts on how do we get teaming partners integrated into a blueprint or a process workflow?
Yeah, I mean, that's trickier than it may seem because a teaming partner on one deal could be a competitor on another deal. So often our companies don't want to disclose, like, this is every step in our process. These are all the details. But I think, if you want to be successful with the teaming partner, I think you need to think through, well, which parts of your process are you hoping that they'll contribute benefit to, and how can you set them up for success? How do you provide enough information to successfully integrate your teaming partner into this deal? I'm just like a very small example, but during the proposal planning phase for a particular customer, maybe past performance is a really critical piece of what it takes to win with that client. And your team, you're using a very specific template to display your past performance. Well, you'll want to share that with your teaming partner, or at least the questions that you need to ask to gather that information from them. Because if you're using their past performance examples to try to win the bid, there's a reason that you're doing that. And you want to set them up for success by giving you the best information to put forward that increases your competitiveness. So I don't recommend sharing the entire blueprint, especially if you compete with this company usually, but enough for the pieces that you hope that they'll be involved in. You have to have a level of transparency and trust there to be pursuing this business together.
Excellent. Vicki, would you add anything?
I agree that we all have to be considerate of whether a company is a future competitor or not. If you have a dedicated partner, however, that's dedicated to your company, certainly you can involve them at a high level to integrate with the process. But Amy's answer was right. Thank you.
Good. And then, and you both alluded to it, that's sometimes we really need to educate teaming partners on what's expected. They may or may not understand these decision gates. They may or may not understand, hey, we're going to do team reviews and individual reviews at these points. And so making sure that we invest in that education piece. Great question. Anything else, Mallory?
No, I think we've answered most of the questions.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. We love to be partners in this type of blueprint for winning activity. We occasionally hold these 2-day client-specific discovery sessions where we work with your leadership team on really rolling up our sleeves and uncovering what needs to be accomplished, what capabilities we have, where are our gaps, where are our strengths. So we love to be involved with organizations that can use this kind of outside expert voice and knowledge and bring some of these models into play and help design a blueprint for winning through collaboration. So we are here to help. What we've tried to do today is give you an idea of what we mean, what industry means by a blueprint to winning, where we might start, how does it fit in your environment, key milestone phases, deliverables, how do we go about documenting this and tailoring it. And then thank you, Vicki, for walking us through that one capability maturity model that really helps us figure out where we are and how we can adopt some of these activities. So with that, we'll let you go about your day. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. Mallory, thank you for all your preparation and for facilitating this. Amy and Vicki, for your expertise and your sharing. And we hope that you'll maybe join us for future webinars. We'll be publishing a first quarter calendar here soon. Our next webinar is coming up in December. We invite you to join us for that. We'll have a few experts from industry join us on that can talk through competitive assessment and how that fits into this blueprint, how important it is. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. And if we can help in any way or answer questions, please feel free to contact any one of us. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.